Here is a question I need you to sit with for a second. Imagine you are a federal fugitive. You are wanted in 3 states. The FBI has your face on a poster. There is a warrant out for your arrest. You are, by every legal definition, a man on the run. Now, what is the single most dangerous thing you could possibly do? If you said, open a bakery in a small town and personally hand free donuts to every police officer who walked through your door for 11 years straight. Congratulations, you have the exact same logic as Robert Callahan. Not once. Not as some kind of nervous, one-time thing. Every single morning, for over 4,000 consecutive mornings, this man who the FBI was actively hunting, baked, packaged, and handed free pastries directly to the people looking for him. And every single one of those officers left thinking he was the nicest guy in Millhaven, Indiana. My name is James, this is Uncanny Crime Stories. And today we are pulling apart one of the most audacious disappearing acts in recent American history, one powdered donut at a time. Welcome back, you relentless, brilliant little investigators. I hope you are comfortably settled in, because this one is going to absolutely unravel you. Let's go. Robert James Callahan was born on a Tuesday in March 1971 in Terre Haute, Indiana, a city that, at the time, was quietly bleeding out. The manufacturing jobs were leaving. The poverty rates were climbing. And in a 2-bedroom house on the south side of town, a woman named Patricia Callahan was raising 2 boys alone, because her husband had left before Robert's younger brother Danny even knew how to walk. Patricia worked double shifts at a diner called Patsy's, which, if you're thinking wait, was the diner named after her? No. That is just the particular brand of cruel irony that this story runs on. She worked for a woman named Patsy, in a diner called Patsy's, and she came home 6 nights a week smelling like fried eggs and exhaustion. Robert watched all of that. He was sharp. His teachers said so, in the way teachers say it about kids they're quietly worried about. Sharp enough to understand what was happening around him, not old enough to do anything about it. What he learned early, and I mean early, we're talking 10, 11 years old, was that there were 2 kinds of people in the world. The people that the system worked for, and everyone else. And he had decided, with the quiet certainty of a kid who's had to grow up too fast, that he was going to be in the first group no matter what it took. Robert got a business degree from Indiana State, first in his family to graduate college. He wore a suit to the ceremony that he bought at a Goodwill and pressed himself the night before. His mother cried. Danny couldn't make it because he was working. He landed a job at a mid-sized financial consulting firm in Indianapolis called Hargrove and Associate. Nothing glamorous, mostly pension fund management for regional companies, a lot of spreadsheets, a lot of conference calls with men who had nicer suits than his. But Robert was good at it. He was meticulous. He had a memory for numbers that bordered on unsettling, and a way of explaining complex financial instruments to clients that made him sound like a trusted friend rather than someone trying to sell them something. By the time he was 28, he was pulling a 6-figure salary. He had a condo. He had a car that wasn't embarrassing. He had, by all external measures, made it. And that should have been enough. It wasn't. In 1999, Robert met a man named Marcus Dreer at a conference in Chicago. Marcus was loud where Robert was quiet, flashy where Robert was controlled. Marcus wore a watch that cost more than Robert's monthly rent, and he had a laugh you could hear from across a hotel ballroom, and he had this gift. This particular, dangerous gift, for making every single person he spoke to feel like they were the smartest person in the room. Marcus had a proposition. Not an illegal one, not at first, not explicitly. He was setting up a private investment vehicle, targeting high-net-worth individuals in the Midwest. Promised returns that were, on paper, aggressive but not impossible. The kind of returns that made careful people pause and say, well, maybe. Robert said yes. He would be the numbers man, the one who made the portfolio look credible, who could sit across from a client and explain, with complete authority, exactly why this was a sound investment. The problem, and Robert either knew this from the start or very quickly figured it out, was that the portfolio was a fiction. The investments didn't exist. The returns were being paid out of new investor deposit. They were running what federal prosecutors would later describe as a textbook Ponzi architecture, targeting primarily retirees and elderly widows across Indiana, Ohio, and Illinois. By 2003, they had taken in approximately $4.2 million from 61 victims. 61 people who trusted them. 61 people whose savings, in many cases their entire savings, were gone. Now I want to pause here for a second because I always reach this part of a financial fraud case and I feel this very specific kind of bafflement, like not at the criminals weirdly, at the rest of us, because we as a species hand strangers our life savings on a fairly regular basis. Some guy in a nice suit says, guaranteed 14% return, and something in our brain just soft reboot. The critical thinking center goes dark. We sign the paper. I'm not judging the victims. I am absolutely 100% judging whatever evolutionary quirk makes us trust expensive watches. Anyway, back to the part where it all collapses spectacularly. Earl Hutchins was 84 years old, a retired electrician from Dayton, Ohio, who had worked 41 years for the same company, saved methodically his entire adult life, and invested $230,000, essentially everything he had, into Marcus Dreer's fund based on a recommendation from a man at his church. In the spring of 2003, Earl tried to make a small withdrawal. He needed to replace his furnace. It was a $5,000 job, and he figured, given what he understood to be the size of his portfolio, it would barely make a dent. He called the number on his statement. It rang. And rang. He called again the next day, and the day after that. On the fourth day, he drove to the office address listed on his paperwork and found an empty suite with a for lease sign in the window. Earl Hutchins went home, sat down at his kitchen table, and tried to calculate what he had left. The answer was close enough to nothing that it didn't matter. He had a cardiac arrest 3 days later. He died in the hospital on a Wednesday morning, with his daughter holding his hand. He was 84 years old. He had worked his entire life, and in the last week of it, he had discovered that the people he trusted had taken everything he built. Earl Hutchins is the reason this story matters. Not the chase, not the donuts, not the audacity of what came next. Earl Hutchins. The walls come down. Earl's daughter contacted the FBI. And when federal investigators started pulling on the threads of Dreer's operation, the whole thing came apart inside of 3 weeks. Marcus Dreer was arrested at O'Hare International Airport, mid-boarding on a flight to Cancun. He had $200,000 in cash in a carry-on. He has never adequately explained why he thought that was subtle. Robert Callahan was picked up at his Indianapolis condo at 6:45 in the morning. He came to the door in a bathrobe. According to the arresting agent, he didn't run, didn't resist, didn't say a word. He just looked at the badges, and then looked past them, like he was checking whether anyone had seen. He was charged with wire fraud, conspiracy to commit securities fraud, and, because of Earl's death, 1 count of criminally negligent manslaughter. His attorney tried to separate him from the manslaughter charge. It didn't entirely work. Robert was denied bail. He sat in pre-trial detention for 7 months while the case was built around him. Marcus took a deal and testified. Robert refused to cooperate. He was looking at 15 to 22 years. On November the 14th, 2003, Robert Callahan was being transported in a federal vehicle to a pre-trial hearing in Indianapolis. There were 2 agents in the car. He was shackled, zip-tied, the whole arrangement. On State Route 40, approximately 22 miles outside the city, a driver in a pickup truck ran a red light and struck the federal vehicle on the passenger side at an estimated speed of 51 miles per hour. The agent in the driver's seat was knocked unconscious. The agent in the passenger seat broke his arm and his collarbone. The vehicle flipped once and came to rest against a concrete barrier. When first responders arrived 11 minutes later, Robert Callahan was not in the car. His shackles were on the ground next to the wreck. They had not been cut. They had not been broken. To this day, nobody has been able to fully explain how they came off. Let that detail sit. It's strange. It should feel strange. A man who was restrained in a wrecked vehicle surrounded by unconscious federal agents had simply ceased to be there. The FBI launched a full fugitive pursuit. His face went on the wanted list. There were alerts in Indiana, Ohio, Illinois, Kentucky. They checked his known contacts, his brother, old colleagues. They found nothing. Not a trace. Robert Callahan had, as far as anyone could tell, evaporated. All right. You ready? Because 11 years of what I am about to describe is either the bravest thing a fugitive has ever done, or the most reckless. I genuinely still haven't decided which. We don't know exactly how Robert Callahan became Thomas Reeves. The identity itself. The social security number, the Indiana driver's license, the credit history, has never been fully traced to its origin. Federal investigators believe he purchased it through a contact he'd made during his time in financial fraud circles. The kind of contact you don't look too hard at. What we do know is that by February of 2004, roughly 90 days after the accident on Route 40, a man named Thomas Reeves had rented a small apartment in Millhaven, Indiana, and put a deposit down on a commercial space on West Main Street. Millhaven. Population 4,211. 2 traffic lights, 1 high school, a grain elevator that was the tallest structure in the county. The kind of town where everyone knows what you had for breakfast because your neighbor saw it in your trash, which is exactly, if you think about it, the worst possible place to hide. Or the best. Because in a town that small, a stranger becomes interesting, then familiar, and then, if they do it right, indispensable. Commercial space had been a bakery before. The previous owner, a woman named June Albers, had run it for 30 years and retired. The ovens were still there. The display cases were still there. It smelled, according to the landlord, like cinnamon and old wood, and Thomas Reeves signed the lease the same afternoon he viewed it. He had never baked professionally in his life. He bought books. He watched videos. This was the early internet, so we are talking about slow-loading, pixelated tutorial pages. He practiced. He burned things. He threw batches away at midnight and started again at 4 in the morning, because the bakery opened at 6 and he had decided, apparently, that his new cover identity was going to be excellent at this thing. Reeves and Sons Bakery opened on April 3, 2004. There were no sons. Nobody asked. In a small town, the name of a business sounds like history even when it isn't. By the end of the first month, he was selling out before noon. Here is the part one need you to understand fully, because it is easy to read this as a strategy and miss what it actually was. Thomas Reeves. Robert Callahan began giving free coffee and pastries to every police officer who came into the bakery. Not because he had calculated that it would make him seem trustworthy. At least, not only for that reason. According to people who knew him in Millhaven, he genuinely liked the officers. He knew their orders. Deputy Karen Olson always got a chocolate glazed and a black coffee. Sheriff Dale Pritchard took a maple bar and would stay to talk about the weather for 10 minutes every Thursday. Robert knew their kids' names, their wives' names. He asked after people. For 11 years, not a single officer who walked into that bakery thought of Thomas Reeves as anything other than one of the best people in Millhaven. Think about what that costs. Not financially. I mean what it costs internally to be that person, to be warm and present and genuinely kind to the people who, in a different context, were your hunters, while carrying the full weight of who you actually were. By 2007, Reeves and Sons was the most popular business in Millhaven. He sponsored the Little League team. He baked free bread for the annual church fair. When old Harold Monroe's house burned down and Harold had nowhere to go, Thomas Reeves let him sleep in the back room of the bakery for 3 weeks. He joined the Chamber of Commerce. He served on the committee to repave the parking lot behind the library. He won the Millhaven Citizen of the Year award in 2009. He was also, around 2008, in a relationship. Her name was Sarah Denton. She was a third-grade teacher. She was 36 years old. She had known Thomas Reeves for 2 years before they started dating and would later describe him as the most genuinely good man I ever met. She had no idea, not a flicker. Robert Callahan, who had defrauded 61 people, who had watched Earl Hutchins's life savings disappear, who had walked away from a federal vehicle in a ditch, was being described, by a woman who loved him, as the most genuinely good man she'd ever met. I'm not going to tell you what to do with that. I'm just going to keep going. Can we just, I need a moment here. Because this man won Citizen of the Year. In 2009, the FBI had his face on a wanted poster, and the town of Millhaven, Indiana, gave him a plaque. I don't know what the plaque said exactly, but I like to imagine it said something like 4 outstanding contributions to community spirit, and he had to shake the mayor's hand and smile, and probably said something humble like, "Oh, it's just what any of us would do. Just a normal Tuesday for a federally wanted fraudster who had a dead man's social security number and a mortgage." Anyway, this is where it all starts to fall apart. Because it always falls apart. In the autumn of 2014, a true crime podcast called Cold Wire released a 2-part episode on the unsolved disappearance of Robert Callahan. It was not a massive show, maybe 40,000 listeners at the time, but it was detailed. It had the mugshot. It had recordings from the FBI press conference after the accident. It had the account of the arresting agent from the morning of Robert's arrest, describing the way he stood in the doorway of his condo and looked past them. One of those 40,000 listeners was a woman named Donna Phelps. She lived in Carmel, Indiana. She had a sister in Millhaven. She visited a couple of times a year. And every time she visited, she went to Reeves and Sons for the cinnamon rolls, which she described to her sister as genuinely life-changing. Donna listened to the podcast on a Wednesday afternoon while she was folding laundry. She almost dismissed it. Almost. But something had hooked in her brain, not about the face, not about the name, about the voice. There was a clip in the episode of Robert Callahan's attorney reading a statement on his behalf outside the courthouse in 2003. And Donna Phelps put down the pillowcase she was folding and sat very still. She called her sister. Her sister told her she was being crazy. Donna sent the episode to the FBI tip line anyway. The FBI receives thousands of tips on open fugitive cases every year. Most go nowhere. A tip from a woman in Carmel, Indiana, about a bakery owner in a town of 4,000 people was not, initially, treated as a priority. But in December 2014, a man named David Marsh, a special agent based in Indianapolis, drove to Millhaven to spend Christmas with his mother, who had lived there for 30 years. On the morning of December 22nd, he walked into Reeves and Sons Bakery. He ordered a coffee and a maple bar. He sat at the small table by the window, and Thomas Reeves, Robert Callahan, came out from behind the counter to wipe down the table next to him and said, "Cold enough for you?" David Marsh looked at him, and something happened in his head. The kind of thing that happens to investigators sometimes, a snag in the pattern recognition, a visual alarm he couldn't immediately name. He finished his coffee. He left a good tip. He went back to his mother's house. He pulled up the wanted file on his phone. The face had aged. The hair was different. The body had filled out slightly with 11 years of someone who ate his own baking every morning. But the hands. There was a scar on the left hand, Robert Callahan's left hand, from a childhood injury. A curved, pale line running from the base of the thumb toward the wrist. The kind of thing that doesn't change. The kind of thing that sits in a file because scars are permanent and people are not as good at hiding the permanent things as they think they are. David Marsh had seen that scar across a bakery table. He made one phone call that night. To his supervisor in Indianapolis. He said 4 words. "I think I found him." We don't know exactly when Robert Callahan realized what was coming, but based on what investigators found afterward, and based on a conversation that Sarah Denton later gave to a journalist, the timeline suggests he figured it out within 48 hours of Marsh's visit. Sarah said he was different in those last few days, quieter than usual, which for Thomas Reeves was very quiet indeed. He made her dinner on the evening of December 23rd, a proper dinner, the kind he rarely had time for, and they sat at the table longer than they normally did. She said she felt, and this is her word, held, like he was trying to memorize something. She didn't ask what was wrong. She would think about that for years afterward. On the night of December 24th, Robert Callahan went to the bakery alone. According to the security footage, which investigators later reviewed, he arrived at 11:15 p.m. and didn't leave until 4:30 in the morning. He baked. For 5 hours he baked. Then he boxed everything up, stacked the boxes neatly on the counter, and wrote a note on a piece of bakery paper. He left the note on top of the boxes. He locked the door behind him, and he walked into the dark. The morning of December 25th, FBI agents surrounded Reeves and Sons Bakery at 5:45 a.m. on Christmas morning. The shop was empty. They found the boxes on the counter. 12 dozen assorted pastries, still faintly warm. Maple bars, cinnamon rolls, chocolate glazed, Deputy Olson's order, Sheriff Pritchard's order, all of them. Every regular accounted for. The note said, "For whoever finds this place. I'm sorry it can't be more." David Marsh stood in that bakery on Christmas morning and looked at the boxes and didn't quite know what he was feeling. Robert Callahan had a 6-hour head start, but he was tired. 11 years is a long time to be afraid. And perhaps, we can't know this, we can only theorize. Perhaps he had already decided that 6 hours was enough. They found him 3 days later at a Greyhound station in Memphis, Tennessee, sitting on a plastic chair with a paper coffee cup and a duffel bag. He was watching the arrivals board. He didn't run when they approached. He stood up, put his hands out, and said, very quietly, "I was wondering how long that would take." Robert Callahan was sentenced in September 2015. He received 17 years, with credit for the 7 months of pretrial detention he'd served before the accident. The judge, a woman named the Honorable Patricia Vance, which I find poetic in a way I can't entirely articulate, said something at sentencing that has stuck with me. She said, "Mr. Callahan, you spent 11 years building a life that showed considerable capability for kindness, community, and human decency. The tragedy is not that you disappeared. The tragedy is what you were running from, and what you left behind in that flight." Sarah Denton did not attend the sentencing. She gave a statement to the court in writing. She said she didn't hate him. She said she didn't know what to do with a love that turned out to be built on a name that wasn't real. She said she kept the bakery going for 2 more years before she had to close it. She said the cinnamon rolls never tasted quite the same when she made them. Marcus Dreer, who had testified against Robert in 2004, had by this point served his sentence and was living in Florida. He sent no message. Earl Hutchins's daughter, Linda, was contacted by a journalist writing about the case. She said she was glad he was caught. She said no amount of good donuts changes what happened to her father. She is not wrong. When FBI investigators processed the back room of Reeves and Sons Bakery after Robert's arrest, they found, in a locked fireproof box under the floorboards, a notebook. The contents of that notebook have never been fully disclosed. What has been reported, in court filings that were partially redacted, and in one brief reference in a subsequent federal proceeding, suggests that the notebook contained detailed records. Not of the Dreer scheme. That was a closed case. Records of something else. Something that prosecutors briefly described as potentially relevant to an ongoing investigation, before those words disappeared from the public record entirely. Robert Callahan has never discussed the notebook. His attorney has said his client has no comment on the subject. The FBI has confirmed its existence and declined to say anything further. 11 years in a small town. Every morning at 4 a.m., before anyone else was awake. A man who was meticulous with numbers. A man who, by his own nature, kept records. What was in that notebook? That, investigators, is a question for another episode. If you've made it this far, you are exactly the kind of person I made this for. Thank you for sitting with the difficult parts of this story. Thank you for caring about Earl Hutchins. And thank you for being, as always, the most relentless, most curious investigators I know. If you have any information, theories, or, I cannot believe I have to say this, have ever received baked goods from a suspiciously charming stranger, drop how it happened, where and when in the comments section. We read everything. This has been Uncanny Crime Stories. I'm James. Stay on the trail.